Okay, before we get started, can we just make one thing clear? This hairband situation happening here is quarantine hair. Lockdown hair, quarantine hair. I'm sure many of you guys out there can relate. But if you're digging the hairband long hair look, let me know. Comment below. Alright, so today we're taking a look at the Canon R6 mirrorless camera, and can I just say... Hey Salam, it's Osman here, helping you create better content every day through video tutorials, editing tutorials, and I guess a bit more gear reviews happening now as well. If you're new here, I'd love it if you'd hit like, subscribe, and all that usual stuff. But let's get into it. Today we're talking about the Canon R6 from the perspective of a old Canon 70D user. And on that note, before we get into this camera, the ergonomics, the 4K, the 4K 60, the 1080p HD, the IBIS, all that great stuff, a couple of caveats before I get into the review. Number one caveat is I haven't spent enough time with this camera by far to make a proper in-depth review. This is more of a first impression / review from a Canon 70D user. So safe to say, when I first tried this camera this weekend, I had to wipe the drool from my mouth before making this review. I did hire it out for a shoot with a client this weekend, which got cancelled, so I had the chance to take this for a spin at the park this weekend to try it out, because why not? I had it anyway, right? Now let me talk about the slow motion 4K elephant in the room. If you are here, I bet you've already watched a number of videos about the R6 and R5, and you've heard a lot about the controversial overheating issues. At the moment, I have not maxed out the usage of this camera enough, of course, in one weekend to use it enough to overheat, so I have not had any overheating issues myself, although I wonder what will happen once I switch this camera over and start filming in a minute. I'll report back at the end of this video. Okay, straight off the bat, let's go into form factor and ergonomics. If you're a Canon user and you've held a Canon before, you know that Canon know a thing or two about making their cameras feel amazing in your hand, and nothing has changed with the R6. If anything, it's gotten even better. The grip here is a perfect grip, non-slip, shall I say. Feels great in the hand, and again, I having come from some of the older APS-C crop sensor cameras, 70D, 600D, T3i for example, I've always shot with the flip screen. So the fact that the flip screen is here is incredible. I don't think I can ever not shoot with a flip screen. Amazing that Canon have put it in this camera as well. Now what's also cool about this camera, which I didn't really get into during my time with it, is that you can customize quite a lot of the buttons and dials to change the settings. So for example, you could change this dial up here to be your ISO or shutter speed, for example, if you really wanted to do that, to customize the camera the way that you enjoy using it. Okay, so let's talk about the video quality and my experience with the 4K 60, the HD 120 in this camera. But before we do that, let's actually switch over to using this camera right now to record the rest of this video. The weight of this lens.
A few moments later.
Well, hello there. Back this time shooting on the R6 with the 2080-70 at roughly 35mm f2.0, looking super tack crisp. And if I just turn off my grade for a second, you can see the C log edge, and if I come back on, honestly, this particular video was easy to edit and color grade compared to the 70D, of course, because that 10-bit color makes a massive difference, but onto that in a second. Alright, so as we know, the R6 is shooting a beautiful full frame 4K up to 60 frames. Now actually, I should say almost full frame, because there is a slight 1.07 times crop, which to be honest is barely noticeable, so it's super close to full frame, and it is actually a downsampled from 5K, making it a bit more sharper and crisper as well, which is fantastic. And also, interestingly, there's also a crop mode in this camera which lets you punch into 1.6 times crop, which is pretty much like a normal APS-C crop sensor camera, right? So for videographers and especially photographers who want that extra flexibility to punch in, that makes it amazing. And that crop mode is also useful for guys like me who shoot with the Sigma 18-35, for example, which is a crop sensor only lens, so I can stick it on the R6, punch in with that crop mode, and Bob's your jaja. So we took the 4K 60 in C-Log with that 10-bit 422 internal color out for a spin. We shot some B-roll sequences, and honestly, I was blown away. I was in love with that 4K super crisp, beautiful image coming out of this Canon camera. I then was dying to try some 120 frames to get even slower slow motion. So we dropped down to 1080p at 120 frames. Now, interestingly, before we get into that sequence, I did use the EF to R adapter to use some of my older lenses on this camera, and I made the mistake of using this 24mm EFS lens on the R6 with the adapter, and when you do that, it will not let you use the 1080p 120 frames per second. You cannot use an EFS lens in that mode, so just be aware of that. So we took the 120 for a spin, and although I was in love with the 120p slow motion, yes, there was a bit more noise in the 1080 footage. It's not as sharp, unfortunately. I did notice while I was color grading that there was noticeable noise and the colors weren't holding up as well. But also, caveat there, we did shoot towards sunset time. It was getting darker, so I did have to punch up the ISO a little bit, but that might have contributed to a bit more noise. But overall, even with that noise, the 120 frames in this camera at 1080 is more than usable. Even though I've upscaled it in this video, I'm not sure if you can tell, and if you can, let me know in the comment section below. Okay, so color grading, that beautiful 10-bit 422 color makes such a massive difference when you're coming from an 8-bit system. In Premiere Pro, when I was grading, it was honestly just super easy, like a dream. The colors weren't breaking. With that C-Log, paired up with that 10-bit, I was getting more out of my shadows. I could recover my highlights as well. Just, oh man. I'm used to using fake log like CineStyle in my 70D, and when using that, it is good, but you have to light your scene properly, have to be very careful with your ISO, and it gets very noisy and the colors do break very easily. So 10-bit in the camera is incredible. Those who come from an EOS R or something similar with an 8-bit system usually have to use something like an Atomos Ninja 5 to achieve that, but having that in the camera in C-Log is just amazing. I will say though, man, these are some beefy codecs that we're filming with here on the R6, but more onto that a bit later on. Alright, autofocus. It's no secret that Canon's dual pixel autofocus is some of the best in the game, and the R6 is no different. The autofocus in this camera, and I'm actually watching it right now on the flip out screen, is just insane. We took a little autofocus test out on my drive, and as you can see here, I actually tried to lose the autofocus a bit, but it kept on tracking my eye. I had eye autofocus on, and this camera is insane. You can even use animal eye tracking as well. I've seen some footage out there, although I didn't use it this time. It looks phenomenal and is tack sharp with the focus. And also within the R6, you can change the speed of the autofocus to make it smoother and rack and pull focus even smoother. So for example, right now, if I did this and did this and did this and did this, that speed, you can change that setting within the camera itself. Didn't get to practice much, but I was still super blown away. This makes it perfect if you rely on autofocus and have your camera on a gimbal, for example, which I did, and following my friend Ardal outside in the park was super easy. I didn't have to worry about focus whatsoever. It was so easy to rely on and shoot with. Overheating update. I've been filming with the R6 for this shot for about 15-20 minutes now. No overheating warning, so let's keep going. Okay, the IBIS in this camera. The R6 has IBIS built in, which the EOS R did not, so that's a great upgrade for this camera, of course with the R5 as well. Now the IBIS did get a bit of a bad rep, especially if you're using it with a super wide focal length, because of this infamous wobble that is introduced in this camera. You have normal IBIS, inbuilt image stabilization, but also a digital IS on top of that, which adds some more enhanced stabilization as well. I believe there's a bit of a crop when you use that mode, but it can help. So I went outside and, like an idiot, held up the camera with this massive 2870 RF on there and just walked about and vlogged. I didn't trust myself to put this on a small Joby Gorilla Pod, and my arms were not going to manage to set up on a gimbal, so I went YOLO and used my hands. Now as you can see, there is a tiny bit of wobble when I used just the IBIS, and perhaps a bit more with the digital IS also switched on, but to be honest, I was expecting it to be a lot worse, and it held up well. And granted, I was using this at about 28mm in focal length, so if I was wider, perhaps I would have seen a bit more wobble in there as well. I wish I could have gone out and shot some more handheld B-roll to really test out the IBIS in this camera, but given my short amount of time with this camera and the horrible weather outside here in Scotland, I didn't get a chance. But you're gonna have to believe me on this one, or watch other people's reviews. Alright, last but not least, because this is becoming a super long video, a little gripe that I have, perhaps not a dislike per se, but maybe it's just me being salty, having moving up from a very old, very easy to use, simple, back when life was simple .h264 files that were easy, not that big. Now with the R6 and those 10-bit 422 C-Log files, these are some beefy files, you know, with that H.265 codec in this camera. Now of course it's not as crazy as the R5's 8K, but even then this, and also in the IPB format, remember it's not in all I, it's an IPB, which is compressed and actually can be a bit more tasking on your computer. So here's me thinking that my trusty old Dell XPS 9570 over there, which is quite packed up, you know, with a 6-core Intel i7, 64 gigs Nvidia GTX whatever, which was pretty fast, was having an asthma attack with this 4K footage. As you can see, I got a few seconds of playback before it started to get very choppy, so I had to enter the world of proxies and converting to ProRes. I've tried converting to ProRes, and after that it did play back pretty smoothly in Premiere. Is it a pain in the backside? Yes. Does it take a lot longer to edit your videos? It does. But is it worth that amazing crispy 4K quality? Something which a lot of reviewers of this camera don't mention also is I'm a PC user, and so when I was even trying to view the 4K files on my PC in Windows Explorer, I couldn't even see a preview of the files, and if I clicked on it, it would not play on anything. I'm talking Windows Media Player, the Photos app, the Movie and TVs app, even VLC Player could not open the video file. So that made it very difficult to know which files were which until I dropped them in Premiere and was able to preview them that way. I don't like that. That is something which is quite annoying, and if there's a workaround, please tell me in the comment section below. So since recording that video, Matt Johnson from whoismatt.com actually made a tutorial on how to solve this problem on Windows 10, so check out his channel along with all his other filmmaking tutorials.
Check this out. Go over here to our footage folder. Ta-da! We got a thumbnail!
Alright, a couple more gripes with this camera, and something which actually made me almost consider Sony, which by the way, I might still do, if they tickle my fancy a bit more. That sounds so wrong. I might still do if I get my hands on a Sony next time, but Canon still has this 30-minute record limit, which is quite annoying in 2021. So it makes me feel like, quite frankly, along with these overheating issues, which I'm sure I'll get if I max out the 4K 60 in this, is that Canon are still treating the R5 and even the R6, quite frankly, as photo first cameras and then video second, almost as if Canon are kind of forcing us to go into their cinema range before we can get those unlimited recording times and much higher quality recording features for video. That being said though, depending on what you're shooting, it's manageable. So if you're shooting in short bursts like I was, if you're a wedding shooter, event shooter, commercial shooter, it should be okay. I personally have a podcast show in which I record podcasts for 1.5, sometimes even 2 hours if it gets that long, and the Canon R6 would probably explode in that time and I wouldn't have a podcast. So I'm not sure if I could rely on this camera to shoot for that long in 4K. That is 1080 might manage, but even then having to stop and press record again after 30 minutes, it's just not convenient, man. And one last thing, Canon has put 2 SD card slots in this body, but you cannot record to both of them simultaneously, so you have one as a backup, which makes it a bit pointless almost, especially if you're something like a wedding videographer where that backup is crucial. So that might be a deal breaker for some of you. Other cameras in this price range can do that. So I'm wondering why Canon is being salty about these things. So concluding words, do I recommend the Canon R6? Will I pick up a Canon R6? To be honest, as I mentioned at the start of this video, I've not spent long enough with this camera to say that I want it or will use it. From what I've used it with already, oh my god, I love the quality coming out of this camera. By no means is it a bad camera compared to the R6 and the R5. In fact, for most of us who are using them as kind of freelancers, not shooting pro level commercials, doing some YouTube work like this, shooting the odd video here and there, the odd wedding here and there, it's a perfect camera, and I would even dare say a perfect hybrid camera because the photos coming at this as well are phenomenal. If you need longer recording times without those overheating concerns, if you want to shoot in high frame rates, or if you need the R5's 4K at 120 frames, then perhaps this is not a camera for you. But to be honest, would I be inclined to buy this? I think so, for me anyway. Alright, that a bit wraps up this long ass review on the Canon R6 coming from a 70D user in love with this thing, and I don't want to give it back tomorrow. But I hope that was useful and helped inform your decision about buying this camera. Let me know your thoughts. What do you think about the R6? Are you thinking about buying one? What are your gripes with it? What are you excited about? Do you have one yourself? What's your experience been like? Drop me a comment down below. And if you have any questions that I can answer from my limited experience with this camera, I'll be sure to answer. Until next time, please go ahead, subscribe for more videos like this and camera tutorials, video tutorials, editing tutorials, and content creation tutorials as well. Until next time, peace, salam, I'll see you soon. I need to think of a better outro, right? YouTubers have these outros, these fancy outros or intros that they're known for. I need to think of one, to be honest. But in the meantime, I'm gonna fix my hair because, man, this hairband thing situation, whew. I need a haircut and a beard cut as well, to be honest. Quarantine problems.